All right. Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series, Israel Insider. My name is Anaf Kalam, and I will be moderating today's discussion. We are pleased to be joined today by Ashley Perry, advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, who joins us each week to give us a brief overview of the top events currently going on in Israel. Mr. Perry will speak for 15 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience. If you'd like to ask a question, you can feel free to use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Afnaf, and good evening from Israel. This obviously what we're going to talk about has gone through various iterations. We were going to talk at the beginning of the week when I was asked for a topic about the aftermath of Netanyahu's visit to the US. Obviously, that was overtaken by events on Saturday when 12 young boys and girls, Druze boys and girls on the Golan were massacred in Majd al-Shams by a Hezbollah rocket. And from that moment on, it was always just a case of what Israel's response would be. There was a lot of anger, as one can imagine. One Druze person remonstrating with ministers in the Israeli government the day after and saying, why is Beirut standing? Why is Beirut still standing? The question is what exactly the response will be. As one can imagine, there was major international pressure on Israel not to respond in a massive way. Certain pointers were given, do not attack Beirut, and things like that. And everyone was sort of waiting to hear exactly what would happen. Well, we had the answer yesterday when Fuad Shukr, ostensibly Hezbollah's number two to Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, was assassinated in the Dahya neighborhood, the Hezbollah stronghold in Beirut itself. It was a very targeted operation, taking out the first couple of levels of a building. It seems that there was minimal, if any, civilian casualties in it. Interestingly enough, at first Hezbollah denied it or said that he's still alive, and only in the last hour or so did Hezbollah come up with their official sort of commemoration poster that in fact he was martyred on his way to Jerusalem. That's the text they like to put on every single martyr poster, which is basically a poster of the victim sometimes smiling after they've been killed. And Israel has almost killed already 400 Hezbollah members. Obviously, this is the biggest one. And as I said, it's number two to Nasrallah. It was a very clever assassination by Israel for many reasons. First of all, it sent a very strong message to Nasrallah and everyone else in Hezbollah that there's no way you can hide. Obviously, Nasrallah has been underground for almost 20 years, since the end of the Second Lebanon War, rarely seen out in public. But the fact that they were able to get to his number two in the heart of Beirut was a really strong message. This is also something that the international community, specifically the Americans, could not come out against, because for those with long memory would remember that Fuad Shukr was deemed at least partly responsible for the 1983 US barracks bombing in Lebanon, where I believe something like 241 US Marines were murdered by Hezbollah. And since then, or at least up until yesterday, there was a $5 million bounty on his head. So the US certainly couldn't come out against this assassination, because he had a lot of American blood on his hands and he was wanted by them as well. So from that point of view as well, it ticked a lot of boxes. But the fact is that it was a very strong targeted assassination. And perhaps Israel needed that, specifically after the response to the Iranian attack in April, and the drone attack by the Houthis recently, which killed one person in Tel Aviv. There was a feeling from the Israeli public there needed to be something strong. And throughout the night, that response got even stronger. Israelis woke up to the news that Ismail Haniyeh, the head of the political bureau of Hamas, the face of Hamas around the world, Ismail Haniyeh had been assassinated. Now, this even up the ante further and had significant symbolism. Let's first of all talk about where he was assassinated. He was assassinated pretty much in the heart of Tehran, in the northern parts of Tehran, but he was assassinated in a Republican Guards compound, which again is a huge embarrassment for the Republican Guards, which is the major militant group in Iran, very close to the Ayatollah, the supreme leader in Iran. The fact that he was killed within one of their compounds is even more of a huge dishonor for Iran. Let's also talk about the occasion. Let's not forget that Hania was in Tehran specifically to pay homage and to be there for the inauguration of the new Iranian president. The last pictures that were taken of Hania were alongside the Iranian president. He also got a meeting with the supreme leader, the Ayatollah, and all of Israel's enemies were pretty much in one place. They had the leaders of the Houthis, many of the leaders of Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, and many of other Israel's enemies. And when you sort of have a look at what Israel could have done, one can imagine it could have taken a lot of enemies, but they would have come with extremely high prices. The fact that they took out Hania was significant. First of all, Hania lives in Doha, and they certainly couldn't attack Hania at this point in Doha because Qatar is playing that intermediary role. Sometimes he goes to Istanbul, to Turkey, and that would have been a major problem, obviously, for Israel, especially after Erdogan, Turkish President Erdogan's comments that Turkey could invade Israel if it invades Lebanon or what have you. So really, Tehran was the best case scenario for Israeli intelligence, and the fact that they took him out around the time of the inauguration of the Iranian president in a Republican Guards compound really was a major symbolic message. And really, those two assassinations, one after the other, really many people are saying that this is probably the 24 hours that Israel has restored some of its deterrence that obviously it's lost in October 7th and onwards. And this really did send a message to Israel's enemies, chiefly Iran. The question that everybody is asking tonight is, what is the response going to be from Iran? Hamas, we know, are pretty much, they can throw some rockets, but on the whole, they're pretty degraded in Gaza. The question is what will be the response from Hezbollah and Iran? First of all, let's talk about Hezbollah. Hezbollah, as I've said for many months, do not want a war, but as long as there is a potential for miscalculation, there is a potential for war. And I think we saw on Saturday a major miscalculation. I do not believe that Hezbollah wanted to kill 12 Druze youngsters, but that's what happens when you lob thousands of rockets. Eventually, one is going to lead to a massacre like that. The question is whether they still want to take that position. They don't want to go to war. Well, pretty much the same things apply as they did before the assassination, that Hezbollah do not want to go to war for all the internal, diplomatic, international reasons that stood for the last 8 or 9 months. But they have to respond, and they have to be seen to respond. The question is what kind of response. At the moment, they have had a relatively measured response. They've largely targeted either empty northern Israeli towns or Israeli military centers in the north. The question is will they go further south, targeting Israel's military centers, or will they, for the first time openly and brazenly, attack Israeli civilian centers outside of the evacuated zone? Haifa is one city that's been pretty much under threat from Hezbollah for some weeks, since they've been releasing all these images of their drones where they know exactly what's going on in Haifa, what the key points are, whether it's the port or military installations or what have you. But there is expected to be an upping of the response to go further south, whether they will respond to civilian, whether they will target specifically. And let's not forget, Hezbollah have precise missiles. It's not like Hamas, which on the whole, does not have precision arms. Hezbollah have extremely precise weapons and missiles, so it would be interesting, or it remains to be seen exactly what they will do. The question then remains is, what will Iran do? And so far, the response from Iran is they said that that their response to this assassination on Iranian soil will be even greater than when it took out a Republican Guard leader in Syria a few months ago. And we remember in April there was those hundreds of missiles and drones which were sent across to Israel. Again, that was less to kill as many people as possible, because if they wanted to, they wouldn't have led with drones and then only launched ballistic missiles afterwards. They wanted to send a message. They wanted to show that they were powerful and they can hit Israel. And it was an unprecedented strike. The language that they're talking tonight is that the response will be even harsher. So it has put Israel on high alert. The home front has been discussing exactly how to respond to it. There has been all sorts of drills. All local authorities are told to, sort of prepare for it. At the moment, there haven't been any specific commands to do anything differently, and life is going on. Any educational facilities are carrying on. Life will continue as we know it tomorrow in Israel. Everything will be normal, but everybody in the security apparatus is certainly waiting to see what this response will be. We know that Hania's funeral will take place on Friday. There'll be a ceremony in Tehran, and then his body will be flown to Qatar. So there is a debate whether the response will happen before or after, but it's clear that Iran will have to respond. But like with Hezbollah, to what point? Will it be a response together? Will Hezbollah attack at the same time as Iran? Will the Houthis attack at the same time? Or some of the other Shiite Iran affiliated terrorist organizations in Iraq and elsewhere? That is the question that's being asked. As I've said for many weeks, there are those in Iran who feel now is a good time to hit Israel. They believe that Israel is at its weakest point. It has been for a long time, militarily, economically, politically, diplomatically, and socially inside the country. Obviously, the fact that Israel showed that it could attack in the heart of Tehran may give some pause to that, but on the whole, there is a section of the Iranian leadership that still believes that. Hezbollah at the moment, still the same situation as before. They do not want an all-out war, but it could be that an all-out war will happen because of this miscalculation, because of this error that could lead to just a sort of upping of the ante with response after response. And before we know it, we could be in an all-out war. The final question before we go to questions is, what would this mean for a potential hostage deal? We know that we were moving pretty close to a hostage deal, but also we know that Ismail Haniyeh himself was one of the major interlocutors for a deal. He led the negotiations from Hamas's side outside of the Strip. Obviously, Sinwar is the decision maker because he holds the actual assets. He holds the Israeli hostages deep in tunnels in Gaza, but Haniyeh was a major interlocutor in Doha and for the Egyptians, etc. And he is not easily replaced. Apparently, you have to have a meeting of the Shura Council, Hamas 50 leaders to replace him, and there simply probably are not 50 leaders of Hamas. Israel has taken out 4 of the 6 leaders of Hamas, and obviously no meeting can take place while many of the other leaders are hiding underneath Gaza. They will obviously have to replace him in somehow, and there has to be some interlocutor to relay messages to Sinwar and back. But it's certainly going to be more difficult for Sinwar to reach a deal in the near term because it will look like a reward for Israel. And let's not forget that Sinwar, who has hoped from October 7th, or rather before, in the planning of October 7th, that his actions and the actions of Hamas will lead to a regional war that will start the countdown to Israel's demise. Perhaps he thinks in this double assassination and the potential response that there's still hope for that. If he does not see significant responses from Iran, Hezbollah, and others, perhaps he starts to think, okay, my days are numbered. It's worth me making a deal. So in the short term, probably the chances for a hostage deal perhaps are less, but beyond that, and again, depending on exactly what the response is, depending whether this does lead to an all-out war or not, will depend on whether Sinwar comes back to the table and wants to make a deal. Interestingly enough, which also plays into a lot of the speculation, we heard Defense Secretary Austin come out today and say, if Israel is attacked, as we did in April, we will defend Israel. Also tonight, finally, Netanyahu addressed the Israeli public, and he said that there are challenging days ahead. Certainly that is what most Israelis think. And he did also tout his credentials without mentioning, and let's be clear, no Israeli official has accepted responsibility for Hania's death, even though they did accept openly for Shulka's death. But Netanyahu put out that it was his decision to push back against all those who said that the war should end. He was who said that we could not conquer the Philadelphia corridor, we could not conquer Rafiah and some of the other places, we could not take out Shulka and some of the other things. So Netanyahu in very bullish mood, and certainly the Israeli public woke up in a good mood after hearing the news about Hania, and that's certainly given a certain wind to Israel, certainly since October 7th. This is a very significant day. Whether this is a complete return to deterrence, interestingly enough, there has been many commentators in Israel who's been at great pains to say that now Israel should go for the hostage deal. Apparently, the whole security establishment is for it. They believe that on the back of these victories, on the back of these achievements, now Netanyahu and the government has the credit to make the deal. So we'll have to wait and see. All of these things are up in the air, and mostly Israel is waiting to sit here and see what the response will be from Tehran and Beirut.
All right. Thank you, Ashley. Now, talking of the hostage deal, what does the targeted killing of Ismail Haniya mean for the hostages? Is there any chance of the hostages to be released alive after all?
Well, as I said, Hania wasn't the most important, I should talk about him in the past tense. It wasn't the most important player in the hostage deal. He was more of an interlocutor. Yes, there was pressure from the sort of Hamas diaspora rule outside of the Strip, and there are a lot of speculation that they were more dovish. They were against October 7th. They thought it was a mistake, and they haven't really changed their mind, and they feel that there should have been a deal. It'd be interesting to see if one of the people from this camp will rise to take Hania's place. As I said, Sinwar will certainly want to see and hear what the response will be from Tehran and Beirut before we understand whether we can go forward with the deal. There was a lot of optimism up until a couple of days ago that a deal was getting closer and closer. There was still quite a significant barriers to overcome. Some blame Netanyahu, who came up with, or didn't come up with, depending on which way you look at it, some new demands. We spoke about them last week, the Philadelphia corridor, the Netzarim corridor, not allowing armed or checking people so there will be no armed groups returning to the north, and a list of the hostages which are alive. But still, there was still a lot of optimism. This will certainly make it more difficult, as I said, in the short term. And really, it depends less on what happened in the last 24 hours. Obviously, it's all related, but more on how Iran responds. Sinwar may get his wish of an all-out regional war, in which case he will hang on, batter down the hatches, and hope for the best. If he doesn't see a significant response, maybe he feels, well, that's it. We've pretty much done everything. We've tried everything, and I just have to cut a deal and hope to get the best deal possible.
All right, thank you. Now, Ismail Haniya is gone. What happens in the event that Yahya Sinwar is also eliminated? What are the next steps after that?
Well, that's a lot more difficult. We know that he's deep underground. He's probably surrounded by hostages. If by some, amazing operation or miracle or however you want to describe it, Sinwar is assassinated, then obviously that will be the major sort of victory image. Israel is, let's say, pretty certain that Mohammed Deif, who is also a very significant Hamas leader, and arguably for the Palestinians in Gaza has even more symbolism than Sinwar, was assassinated. It hasn't been absolutely confirmed, and certainly not from Hamas, and may well never be. But Israel is increasingly confident that Deif was taken out. Sinwar, through all of these other assassinations, he will have gone further and further underground, taken more and more measures to ensure that he will not be assassinated. Obviously, it could happen. I'm not privy to all those sort of details, but obviously that will be the most significant assassination of the war so far.
Now, we have a question from George Abraham. He says, Khalid Mashal's name is being suggested as the replacement. How is that for Israel?
Well, let's not forget Ismail Haniyeh took over the job of Khalid Mashal as the head of the political bureau for Hamas. His name is being touted, obviously, because he is still a significant leader. But from what I understand, he has pretty bad relations with Iran. He has pretty bad relations with Hezbollah. So it's unlikely that someone with those kind of, poor relations with Hamas's overlords, let's say, it's going to be hard for Mashal to take over that position at this point. That's my understanding. Again, I don't follow the intricacies of Hamas rule too much, but my understanding is that one of the reasons that he was replaced and shunted aside over the years is because of his poor relations with some of Hamas's biggest allies.
All right, thank you. Now, you touched on this earlier in your discussion, but earlier today, MEF's President Daniel Pipes had an article in the Wall Street Journal in which he suggested that after Israel had been tottering for so long between a hostage deal and negotiation and a total victory and elimination of Hamas, he believes that the strike on Ismail Haniyeh was signaling that Israel is leaning towards now a total victory. Do you agree with that assessment?
First of all, there was one comment that he made in his Wall Street Journal article, and I would certainly urge everyone to read it, which I thought was very interesting and very significant. Is that he said taking out Haniyeh in Tehran is like taking out Mussolini if he would be in Berlin during the Second World War. I mean, that really is sort of it's a very interesting and pertinent analogy. Whether Israel has, if we go by what Prime Minister Netanyahu says, that Israel has never stopped seeking total victory. Exactly what total victory means is something which analysts and commentators in Israel are poring over. But it's certainly, again, what has happened in the last 24 hours, I cannot overstate its significance. Since October 7th, where Israel's deterrence took a massive, massive pounding, this is probably the single 24-hour period where Israel regained some semblance of its deterrence. Interestingly, it didn't do it by pounding capitals. It didn't do it by killing lots of people in Gaza and routing large armed forces. These were very carefully selected and carefully executed assassinations, but they are extremely significant. There's number 2 in Hezbollah and the number 1 Hamas leader outside of Gaza. Very, very significant, and certainly will have, and already probably has, redeemed Israel's place in the region amongst allies and its enemies, and will certainly give pause for thought to many of its enemies who thought that Israel was tottering, Israel was weakened. The fact that Israel has this reach, has this capability, intelligence, one can only imagine what intelligence led to, such detailed planning. I mean, again, in the middle of a crowded neighborhood in Beirut to take out the second in command of Hezbollah. There's been different opinions if other people were killed, if there were 2 children killed, we don't know exactly, but the fact They were to do this with minimal collateral damage, and in Tehran, zero collateral damage. Only one of his bodyguards was taken out with him. One of the people actively involved, apparently, in October 7th, really shows that Israel had not just amazing intelligence, but real strong ability to strike its enemies pretty much at will. Beirut and Tehran are really the major center of Israel's enmity at the moment. These are the two most worrying centers for Israel. Gaza, despite what happened on October 7th, doesn't have the capability of Hezbollah. The Houthis do not have the capabilities of Hezbollah or Iran. So this really was a very strong message. And certainly Netanyahu used the phrase once again, total victory, saying we are on course. And while there are voices, that's the terminology used, who has tried to dissuade me throughout the war from continuing towards victory, I have not listened to them. And now you're starting to see the fruit of my vision, and that is on the way to total victory.
All right, thank you. Now, going back to the Hezbollah attacks on the young Druze children in northern Israel, Carrie Hillebrand asks, do we know what the reaction has been of the Lebanese Druze? Are they likely to defy the Jumbalats and take a more aggressive stand against Hezbollah?
I think, like everything, it's a mixed bag. We have heard, like Ali Jumbalat, the ostensible leader of Lebanon's Druze, who basically sided with Hezbollah. But there's a lot of other Druze who are not happy about Jumbalat's leadership. They say he's tried to sort of Islamicize the Druze over the years, and they got into bed with Hezbollah and some of the others after being staunch opponents. And there is a lot of anger about that. The fact that Hezbollah at first took responsibility for the rocket launches, and then we realized the casualties amongst the Druze, they went into damage control, denying it, and then basically saying that it was a result of Israel's Iron Dome, nothing to do with us at all, because they understand that the Druze, though a weakened population in Lebanon, they're not what they were 10, 20 years ago. The Christians and the Druze are emigrating from the country, and so they're not the power that they were 20, 30 years ago, but they're still a significant player. And Hezbollah understood the damage of killing 12 young Druze children. And let's not forget, these are not Druze from the center of Israel, which are loyal and serve in the IDF. These are on the Golan. Many of them identify themselves as Syrian. They are not necessarily Israeli citizens. In fact, the majority of the Golan Druze choose not to be Israeli citizens. So this looked bad for Hezbollah. So they went into damage control, and this will certainly be challenging days for those like Jumlat who still try and press his community to align themselves with Hezbollah, especially after that tragedy, because a lot more Druze are starting to see through the lies of Hezbollah that this wasn't them and their allies. But again, there's major splits in that community.
All right, thank you. Now, Rodney Margolis asks, if a full-scale war with Hezbollah breaks out, what are the estimated results, both human and logistical?
Oof, that's a difficult one to say. What does a war look like? How long will it last? There's all sorts of assessments in Israel. How long? I mean, we know that Hezbollah can fire thousands of rockets a day at Israel for, I think, a good few months, and significant rockets, which will keep Israelis in safe rooms. Life won't be able to go on as normal. Obviously, flights in and out will be either non-existent or something close to that. So it's impossible to say, because again, Hezbollah do not want a war. They've said that. Both sides have said we don't want a war, but if a war is pushed on us, we will not shirk from it. It shows that neither side want a war, but as I've been saying for months, one miscalculation, one error could lead to that. Perhaps the massacre of the 12 Druze children on Saturday could be that catalyst. But both sides pretty much still remain in their positions that they would prefer not to go to war, but each side will have to respond to the other. If Hezbollah do go further than they've gone before, further south, attacking civilian populated civilian areas, then Israel will have to respond in kind, if not further, and then Hezbollah will have to return to that. So it could happen. We'll have to wait and see what Hezbollah's options are and what happens. But certainly, war is closer tonight than it was yesterday, last night, or the night before. But it's impossible to say because we don't know exactly how long the war will last for, and we don't know what capabilities Hezbollah will use. Let's not forget, Hezbollah really at its core is still run from Tehran. It's still there to be a deterrent from Israel from attacking Iran. Perhaps all those bets are off. But let's not also forget that Nasrallah, who's going to give a speech tomorrow where we could understand a little bit more, still has a local domestic element to his rule. So he has to take that into consideration. His party, his movement, his terrorist organization is becoming less popular by the day in Lebanon. So obviously he'll be taking all of these things into consideration when he and his other generals will decide on the response.
All right. Thank you very much, Ashley. We have unfortunately reached the end of our podcast for this week. I want to thank you again for taking the time to update us this week.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Of course. And for our viewers and listeners, please be on the lookout for our weekly podcast offerings email coming out over the weekend. As always, we thank you again for joining us and for your participation, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.